Welcome to this session on lasers. In this session we'll be talking about the following. First we'll have a brief introduction to this topic of lasers. Then we'll talk about induced absorption, spontaneous emission and stimulated emission, the three processes. And then we'll look at the principle of laser, how a laser works, and then we'll look at how we construct a ruby laser, and then we look at properties and applications of lasers, where exactly lasers are used, and then finally we'll look at a topic called as photonics. These are the topics we are going to discuss in this session. Now let's start off with a brief introduction to the topic. So laser, as I have mentioned here, is an acronym and stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Now note the term stimulated emission here, and we are going to discuss about what is stimulated emission when we talk about induced absorption, spontaneous emission and stimulated emission. So laser stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, and it was in the year 1916 that Einstein predicted or talked about a process which we now know as stimulated emission, and laser is based on that principle. The first ruby laser was constructed by a scientist known as Theodor Maiman. Theodor Maiman constructed the first ruby laser, and that was in the year 1960. Ever since then, there has been huge developments in the field of laser and laser technology. Now, after having got a brief introduction to this topic, let us move on to what are known as induced absorption, spontaneous emission and stimulated emission. So, let me draw some diagrams which will illustrate the concept. The energy incident on that is absorbed by the atom, and the atom goes to a higher energy state. So we can write this as atom plus photon gives atom star. So this is about induced absorption. This is absorption. Absorption of radiation. Now let us look at what is emission. This is spontaneous emission. So the first step here was the atom absorbed the energy of the incident photon and got to a higher energy state. Now generally what happens is an atom cannot remain in this higher energy level for an indefinite time. In fact, most of the time, the amount of time that an atom can spend at this level is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 8 seconds. So this is the approximate time duration for which an atom can be in the excited state. So once it goes to the excited state, what happens is this atom moves to a lower energy state, and then the difference in the energy level is given out as a photon. This is energy, this goes out as a photon. This is the incident photon or radiation. This goes out as a photon. So in this case, we can write spontaneous emission as atom in the excited state giving rise to atom at the ground state plus a photon. So note that spontaneous emission in this case is exactly the reverse of absorption, induced absorption. We call it as spontaneous because the amount of time the atom can spend in a higher energy state is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 8 seconds. So it's as if almost spontaneously the atom has to go back to the lower energy state. So this is why we call it as a spontaneous emission. As opposed to absorption and spontaneous emission, there is a third type of action that can take place. Note that most of the time the atoms follow the cycle of induced absorption and spontaneous emission. When spontaneous emission takes place, these photons travel in different directions, or the light particles move in different directions. They are not in phase with one another. So this is what happens in spontaneous emission, because these transitions occur at different time intervals. And now when we talk about the other type of emission, which is called as stimulated emission. Let me explain what this is. Now even in this case, this is pretty similar to spontaneous emission in some aspects, in that the atom at a higher energy state falls back to the lower energy state. So as far as this action is concerned, spontaneous emission and stimulated emission are same. Note that in this case there is a difference because we are making one photon incident on the excited atom. So a photon of appropriate frequency or wavelength is incident on this excited atom. So what happens, what we observe is, so as the atom moves from a higher energy state to a lower energy state, it has to give out one photon, and then this incident photon is copied. So what we find is two photons are given out at this time. The interesting point here is, it is not just as if two photons are going out, but the photon that gets emitted because of the atom moving from E2 to E1 is always in step or in phase with the incident photon. That what we mean by this is, if the incident photon, if I can represent the phase of the incident photon as it is, then the other photon that is emitted also has the same so the crest and the trough of the emitted photon is in step with the crest and trough of the incident photon. So the photons are in phase. This is what is known as stimulated emission, because the emitted photon is stimulated by the incident photon here, by the phase of the incident photon and in the direction of the incident photon. So this is the photon multiplication effect or the stimulation effect that we see here. This process is known as stimulated emission. The photon that is emitted has properties that are copied from the incident photon. So this is the difference between a stimulated emission and a spontaneous emission. A spontaneous emission does not require a photon to be incident on that, and spontaneous emission occurs when an atom at a higher level moves to a lower energy level, with the difference in energy level being given out as in terms of a photon. Whereas in the case of a stimulated emission, it requires that the atom be at a higher level, and in addition to that, a photon is incident on this atom, and then we have two photons coming out at this point of time, and the photon that is emitted by the transition from E2 to E1 by the atom is in sync with the incident photon in terms of phase. So this is about stimulated emission. Note that, as I mentioned earlier, it was in the year 1916 that Einstein thought of a process which is pretty similar to, which we now call as stimulated emission. And laser, incidentally, works on the principle of stimulated emission. Now there is one point, probably I will explain the stimulated emission in terms of a different diagram so that it becomes clear to us as to how the multiplication of the photons take place, or how exactly the amplification, as we call it, takes place. Now let me write down, let me say that this is a, as we know that matter consists of several atoms, so I am looking at one specific atom here, and then I have the atom at higher energy level here, and then I have one incident photon interacting with this excited atom. So as I mentioned, when this incident photon is incident on this excited atom, it gives out two photons. Let me illustrate the two photons given out as follows. So there are two photons coming out from here. And now incidentally note that there are other atoms. There are other atoms in this matter. So let me write down one more atom here. And let us assume that even here the atom is at a higher level. So at the same time when E2 falls, when this atom goes from energy level E2 to E1, very likely that this atom will also fall from energy level E2 to E1. And likewise, I have a transition from E2 to E1 in this particular atom also. And now this photon, so note that initially I had one photon falling on this particular atom, and then this atom fell from energy level E2 to E1 and then ejected out. We got two photons out of this. One photon from the incident photon and other photon that we got by transition of the atom from E2 to E1. Now this photon is falling on this particular atom, and again here the atom is moving from energy state E2 to E1 and the photon is incident on that, so therefore this gives out two photons. And likewise, even this atom gives out two photons. Note that I have just one incident photon here, and at the output, when I consider just three atoms here, I am getting 1, 2, 3, 4 photons going out in step with one another. This is what we mean by amplification. So it's amplified. The photon here and one photon here, I've got 4 photons here. Now imagine bulk of matter where there are several atoms. So if I have several photons incident on that, it has got a cascading effect, and therefore the output is going to be a stream of photons or light particles that are in phase with one another. I get an intense beam of light as the output, and that is what we call as laser, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. That's what is known as laser beam. So we call this as a laser beam, the output of this. Now this is the principle on which a laser works. However, note that, as I mentioned earlier, the energy level E2 is such, for most of the items, note that the atom can stay in this energy level E2 only for a very short duration of time. As I mentioned, it's of the order of 10 to the power of minus 8 seconds. This is true for most of the atoms. So an atom can be in excited state only for 10 to the power of minus 8 seconds. So it's very unlikely that you will have a photon which can create these transitions in such rapid rate. Most of the times what happens is these transitions will occur at random times. So for example, this atom, as far as this atom is concerned, E2 to E1 transition can occur at time t1 and this can occur at time t2. And they're all in different directions. So it's very unlikely that we'll get a laser beam as the output. So stimulated emission is very unlikely to happen in the case of such atoms. Now it is only because the amount of time an atom can be in an excited state is very small. This is the reason we cannot have stimulated emission in such cases. So there is a prerequisite for laser action to take place, and that stems from the limitation that we have here, that the atom can spend very less time in an excited state. So if I can find a material wherein the atom can be in a higher state for a longer duration of time, then I can get the laser effect or the lasing effect. So let us write down a diagram and depict how we can get that. So we looked at induced absorption, we looked at general principle how a laser works. Now let me explain what is it that is necessary for us to have so that we can have the lasing effect or the laser action to take place. Now there are atoms. Now let us assume that there are So I am looking at the principle of laser here. So let us assume that there is, let us assume that I have an energy level here wherein the atom can stay in the excited state for a longer duration of time. And let us assume that we have more of atoms in the excited state than in the lower stage. Normally we don't get laser action, as I mentioned earlier, basically because of two reasons. One is the number of atoms that are in the excited state at any point of time for a given temperature is very less, far less compared to the number of atoms in the ground state. So what happens if there is energy radiation that is falling on that, some of these atoms go to a higher energy state and then immediately they fall back to a lower energy state because the amount of time it can spend in the higher energy state is 10 to the power of order of 10 to the power of minus 8 seconds. So it's very unlikely that you will have laser action. One of the prerequisites for laser action to happen is we need to have more number of, as we can make out pretty easily, is if we have more number of atoms in an excited state prior to the photon striking the atoms, then we will have a lasing effect, because this photon incident, the incident photon would help or augment the number of emitted photons, and therefore we get the laser action. And now that is one of the prerequisites here. Now in a laser, what happens is you will have a metastable state here, and then this is the normal state of the atom, this is the excited state, and then I have a metastate here, metastate or a metastable state. Let me write this down as, this is the ground state, and this is the excited state, and this is the metastable state. So what happens is, if we can excite these atoms to a higher energy level, and then these atoms, let us assume, have a metastable state or an intermediate state wherein the amount of time that the atom can spend here is of the order of 10 to the power of minus 3 seconds. So whereas an atom can spend 10 to the power of minus 8 seconds here, it can spend 10 to the power of minus 3 seconds in this state. So an atom, when it gets excited from energy state G, this is the ground state, to E2 state, what happens is it doesn't fall back from E2 to G, but it falls to a metastable state. It stays there, the atom stays in this metastable state for a duration of 10 to the power of minus 3 seconds, and after that they fall back to state G. So in which case what happens is, I can make the number of atoms in this state more than the number of atoms in this particular state. It is because it takes almost, the transition from G to E2 is almost instantaneous, and then from E2 to E2 to metastable state N, it happens almost instantaneously, but then it stays here for a duration of 10 to the power of minus 3 seconds. So in the meantime, when these atoms are in the state metastable state, I can pump much more atoms from level G to E2 and then through M. So at some point of time, I will have more atoms in metastable state than at ground level. And this process of having more number of atoms in the excited state or in the metastable state as compared to the ground state is what is known as population inversion. We call it as population inversion. Population inversion. So population inversion is the process of increasing the ratio of atoms in metastable state or higher energy state to the number of atoms at the lower energy state or the ground state. And that's what we mean by population inversion. That means the population of atoms, normally we have higher number of atoms in ground state compared to higher energy state. In this case we are reversing that or inversing that. We are having more number of atoms in the excited state than in the ground state. So obviously we need to supply some kind of energy to the atom to make these atoms move to a higher energy state to start with, and that process is called as pumping. So pumping is the process of supplying energy to make these atoms move from lower energy state to higher energy state and to achieve population inversion. So these are the two terms that we need to remember, that these are important concepts and these are needed, and the population inversion is an essential thing for laser action to take place. So population inversion and pumping are very important concepts here. And if you use a light source for doing this optical pumping, for doing the pumping, we call this optical pumping. So as I mentioned, pumping is supplying of energy so that atoms move from ground state to excited state. And I can pump energy through various means, and if I use optical energy, then it's called as optical pumping. So optical pumping is used to achieve population inversion. Now this is the principle on which a laser works. A laser works by having more number of atoms in the excited state than in the ground state, and then with this state, when we have more number of atoms in higher state, I make a photon incident on this. So this photon falls on this, makes the atom in this excited state move to the ground level state, and then it gives out photons, the incident photon plus a copy of the incident photon. So you get two photons out of this by an incident photon. So let me write down the value that the energy level values for a typical case of a ruby laser. We will discuss ruby laser next. 2.25 electron volt, and then the metastable state is at 1.79. This will be at 1.79 electron volt, and obviously this is the ground state, which will be 0. And now optical pumping happens at 550 nanometers. So optical pumping in this case will happen at optical pumping in this case for a ruby laser will occur at 550 nanometers. 550 nanometers needed to move the atom from this level to this level, from 0 to 2.25 electron volt. And note that when the laser beams are, when the photons are ejected out here, it translates to the energy difference between 1.79 electron volt to the ground state, and therefore by calculation we can show that the laser transition is happening at 694.3 nanometers. So the laser given out is of the order of 694.3 nanometers. The incident wavelength will have, for the optical pumping, will have 550 nanometers. In this case, normally there is no incident photon. One of the photons that gets generated when the atom in excited state moves to a ground level state starts off the process of light amplification. So one stray photon that gets generated by the first transition of an atom from metastable state to ground state is what starts the light amplification process. That becomes the incident photon for other atoms, and that's how this light amplification takes place. And this energy is needed for us to raise these atoms from ground energy state to energy state E2. Note one very important concept here: when an atom moves from energy state E2 to a metastable state, this transition doesn't generate any radiation. So we call it as radiation-less transition. So this one is radiation-less transition. Right, this is radiation-less transition. The question is, what happens to the energy that is given out when an atom moves from excited state to a metastable state? The answer is that goes as a heat energy for lattice vibrations. So the energy that is equivalent to the energy difference between E2 and the metastable state is radiation-less. You don't get radiation energy, but it goes as heat energy, and the material gets heated. Basically it goes for lattice vibrations of the crystals. So but the energy from here to here is given out in terms of photons. This is the principle on which a laser works. So let me repeat that: for a laser to work, we need to have population inversion, and for us to achieve population inversion, we need to do some kind of pumping. pumping refers to the action of moving atoms from a lower energy state to a higher energy state, where the atom can remain for a longer duration of time. And now population inversion refers to the process of having more number of atoms in the higher energy state or in the excited state than at the ground state. So these two concepts are important. So when the atom gets excited, the atom moves to a lower energy state or a metastable state and stays there for a longer duration of time. When this transition from a higher energy state to a metastable state occurs, it gives out radiation less. That transition is a radiation less transition. The energy difference goes out in terms of heating the material or for lattice vibrations. But when a transition occurs from a metastable state to a ground state, that energy is coming out in terms of photons. And for a ruby laser, the wavelength of the energy of the radiation given out when the atom moves from a metastable state to a ground state is 694.3 nanometers. And the energy or the wavelength that is supplied for optical pumping of a ruby laser is 515 nanometers. I haven't even talked about a ruby laser, but I'm just giving an example to illustrate the range of values that we have for emitted radiation as well as for radiation used for optical pumping. Now this is the principle of laser as explained. Now let us move on to ruby laser. Construction or working of a ruby laser. Let us now discuss the working of a ruby laser. This is a diagram of a ruby laser, and note that here that is a tube that you find here is a xenon lamp, and we use the xenon lamp to for optical pumping. And now this consists of a cylindrical tube here with two ends. One end is very highly polished. End A is a surface that's coated heavily with silver on the inner side, and then B is the other surface which is partially coated with silver. And now this is the ruby laser, and ruby essentially consists of aluminum oxide Al2O3 with a small impurity of 0.05% of chromium oxide. So it's a chromium oxide basically that has the metastable state and provides for the laser action. So chromium oxide incidentally has a metastable state wherein the excited atom can stay for a duration of 3 into 10 to the power of minus 3 seconds. So this is the duration of time for which an excited atom, chromium atom, can stay for that duration of time in the metastable state. So as we mentioned earlier when we were discussing about the principle of laser, so there is an optical pumping that is needed, and that optical pumping, the energy for pumping is provided by this xenon lamp. So initially what happens is this xenon lamp is flashed, so that supplies the optical energy for the chromium oxide, for the chromium ions here inside to get excited. So that we have a laser action here. So these normally when the photons are generated in random directions, the photons that are generated in this particular direction on the axial path are the ones that move along this direction. The photons that are generated in other direction or move out of this surface. So these photons move away from the surface, go out of the surface incidentally, because these sides are not polished. But only the photons that are moving along the axial surface keep progressing there, and this is what provides for the laser action. So these photons, as they traverse in this direction, encounter the surface which is partially coated with silver, and then these photons get reflected on this side of the surface, and then they move backward. And as these photons move backward, they induce more of laser action, more of light amplification. So these photons move in the backward direction, and then they encounter the surface which is heavily coated, and so these photons again get reflected off the surface. and then they move in the other direction. So as the photons keep moving back and forth, we have more and more photons getting ejected because of the laser action. So finally there is a strong beam of photons that are coming out here, and since this is partially silvered, some of the photons escape from here, so we get a strong beam of light on this side. Photons get emitted from this side, and this is what constitutes a laser beam. And note that ruby laser gives out characteristic red color here. So the beam that we get out of this side is a red beam color. Is of red beam color. This is how a ruby laser works. And now incidentally I have a demo of a laser here. This is a laser line. This is used for finding out drawing straight lines. So this gives out this I can illustrate laser action by this. So note that the laser beams that are given out here are of same color. It's a monochromatic beam of light that's coming out from here, and this is of characteristic color of the laser that is used in this case. Now a couple of properties we can make out in here of laser light. We are looking at properties and applications of laser. So first is it's a coherent, is a monochromatic light. That means light of one single color, monocolor. So monochromatic light, and this laser light is concentrated. I mean, there is not much of spread in this laser light. It's a straight beam of light, and it is very straight. So these are some of the properties of laser light. So let me write down some of the properties of laser beams, and then some of the applications of laser beam. One of the main applications for laser is in the CD, the readers in the CD readers, or the optical drives that we talk about in computers or in the tape recorders. So it's used in the CD recorders or CD players. It's also used in computers for the DVD recording and DVD writing, obviously. And then it's also used in several other applications. For example, it's used in laser surgery, wherein the detached retina is attached back in the eye. So we use laser beams for that because you can make precision, pointed, directed light incident on any specific point of time. So specific point. So that's why we use laser beams. Let me write down some of the properties and applications of laser. Listed some of the properties of lasers and the applications of lasers here. So when you look at the properties of lasers, they are highly monochromatic, as I can illustrate here. The light coming out from here is of single color. So the light coming out from here is single color, is highly directional. It doesn't spread. For example, as opposed to light from a flashlight bulb, this one is very straight and very directional. It doesn't spread too much. The light is coherent with all waves in phase, and that's the reason you get an intense and a bright beam here. So that's about some of the properties of lasers. And when you look at applications of lasers, there are several applications for lasers. I have just listed out some of them. Your textbook probably gives more applications than what I have listed out here. And some of the common applications, as I can find here, is optical communication. We are using fiber optics these days to transmit information. For example, if you want to have a network of computers or telephones or broadband connection, we are using optical fibers because they give you, they carry more information than the copper cable. And we use laser beams for that, for optical communication. And now we also use laser beams for scanning information, the barcode. So if you go to some of the grocery stores or some of the other stores too, you find the counter person scanning the barcode using a device, and that device has a laser beam which helps in scanning the information on the barcodes. And again, they're used in holograms. We'll look at holograms later. So it's used in holograms to store more information basically. And then we use lasers in laser surgery. The main use of laser surgery will be in the case of attaching the detached retinas in the eye. So this is one of the famous applications of laser beams. And again, laser beams are used to cut and weld strong metals because they are very directional and very intense and bright. And now they are also used, as you are all aware, of is in CDs in music systems as well as in computers for your CD drive or the DVD drive. We use laser beams for that. So these are some of the properties and applications of lasers. Now, after having discussed about these aspects about Ruby laser and properties and applications of laser, let us move on to the next topic, that is about photonics. Let us now have a brief discussion about the topic of photonics, which is given over here. So photonics is defined as the technology of control, manipulation, transfer and storage using light. It also includes generation and harnessing of light. Note that photonic devices generally use electrical and electronic energy or devices for generation of light. So it's pretty close to topic known as the area called as optoelectronics, where electronics and light, the area of light and electronics are combined. So photonics is pretty close to the area of optoelectronics. Now let us look at some of the applications of photonics. The first one is an optical fiber. You know that they could make around 3 into 10 to the power of 8 telephone calls using a single strand of optical fiber. So that's the amount of bandwidth an optical fiber gives, and we use laser light to transmit information on the optical fibers. And now photonics is also used for the measurement of physical parameters such as temperature, vibration and sound. And the other important application of photonics is in the area of holograms, which are used to store large amount of data. The space that is required to store this large amount of data is very less. So the footprint is very less, and that's one of the advantages of holograms. And now again, photonics finds an application in medical imaging and also in laser lights. So photonics finally finds application in night vision sights, or the devices that one uses in the military for getting better vision during night times. So these are some of the typical applications of photonics. So just make a note of the definition of photonics and then some of the applications of photonics. So this is a very brief introduction to photonics. So those of you who are interested in learning more about it, you can go to the internet and browse for photonics, and you will have tons and tons of information that's available to you. So with this brief discussion on photonics, we are concluding our discussion on the topic of lasers. So we talked about introduction, we talked about these 3 different types of interactions between radiation and atoms. One is the induced absorption, spontaneous, simulated emission. We talked about the principle of laser. We discussed about Ruby laser as to how it works. We looked at some of the properties and applications of laser, and finally we looked at the topic of photonics. With this we are concluding the session on laser. Thank you very much.